Well, good afternoon and welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Andrew Doffney. I'm the Instruction and Outreach Librarian at the New Jersey State Library. And it is my pleasure to kick off our National Family History Month programming by welcoming back Melissa Johnson to speak today about local repositories, including libraries and historical societies, how to go about researching them and what kind of records and services that they may provide. Oftentimes we think of Ancestry, Family Search, all those wonderful online repositories that have great information, but there's also a lot of things that aren't available online, and a lot of them are located in a local repository. So hopefully you'll be able to take some tips and tricks out of here and go adventuring on your own. So, for those of you who may not know, Melissa Johnson is a professional genealogist specializing in New Jersey, New York City, Pennsylvania, British, Irish, Italian, and Eastern European families, as well as forensic genealogy and using DNA to solve difficult genealogical problems, unknown parentage, genealogical writing, editing, and publishing, and genealogical education. Her work has been published in numerous peer-reviewed journals, including the National Genealogical Society Quarterly, New York Genealogical and Biographical Record, and the Genealogical Magazine of New Jersey. Melissa has previously served as editor and columnist for NGS Monthly, authoring dozens of articles on sources and research methodology. She is the author of Adoption and Misattributed Parentage Research chapter in Debbie Parker Wayne's Advanced Genetic Genealogy Techniques and Case Studies. And for 11 years, Melissa served as reviews editor for the Association of Professional Genealogists Quarterly. So welcome, Melissa. We're really excited to have you back and looking forward to what you can share with us today. Before we jump into our presentation, I just have a few housekeeping items to go over. First and foremost, we will be taking your questions at the end of the presentation, but you can submit them at any time using the Q&A or the chat feature in the Zoom dashboard. Melissa has graciously provided me with a handout that I will be uploading to the chat once we get underway. If you have any problems downloading it from the chat, don't worry, it'll be available in a follow-up email as an attachment. At the end of the webinar, you will be prompted to fill out a survey. So if you have time, we ask that you please complete the survey. We really, truly appreciate any and all feedback that you can give us. And if you want more information about genealogy, you can visit our library genealogy research guide at the web address on the screen there. That is curated by our genealogy librarian, Regina Fitzpatrick, and is chock full of great information no matter on what stage of your genealogical journey you're at. So I'd highly encourage you to check that out at your leisure. And I'll be sending a live link of that into the chat as well momentarily. And then one last thing, I just have a brief outline of the Zoom dashboard. This is what your dashboard should look like if you're using a PC or a Mac. If you're using a mobile device, the dashboard may look a little bit different, but all the features will still be there. In the bottom left-hand corner, you can check your audio settings. So if you're using an external listening device like a headset or earbuds, you can check to make sure it's connected properly there. At any point during the presentation, if you have any issues, there is a raise hand button here in the middle. You can click on that and that'll alert me. I will send you a message in Zoom and hopefully be able to resolve any problems that you are having. And then, as I mentioned, if you do have questions, you can either use the Q&A or the chat buttons. Either the one will get in touch with us and we'll be happy to address those at the end of the presentation. So that is everything that I have for you. So you can take it away, Melissa.
Thank you. All right, so we are going to talk about how to best understand and utilize the resources available to you through local libraries and through historical societies. And we'll be focusing a lot on examples from New Jersey today, but please just remember if your family is from Ohio or Pennsylvania or somewhere else, these same concepts do apply. So why do we want to focus on these local resources? I'm sure many of you have spent lots of time perusing Ancestry and Family Search, maybe visiting our state archives right down the street, visiting in person at the library, or even going to your local courthouses to find records. And there you've probably focused pretty heavily on maybe vital records or court records, divorces, naturalizations, census, things like that. But these are records that, while they do focus on people and they tell you about people, they aren't specific to the local area as much as local resources can be, like yearbooks and city directories and things like that that are very localized. So when we focus on these local resources, we are probably going to find resources that are more relevant to our family and also more personal to our family. So we can learn a little bit more about how they interacted with those communities and what their interests were, what their beliefs were, how involved they were. So you're learning about community context, the community as a whole, but then you also are able to see how your ancestors fit into that community. The other interesting element about these local resources is that in many cases, those materials are not found elsewhere, or they're not found in too many places. A census record, for example, you can find that in one of many places. Even vital records sometimes are available in multiple places, a state level and a county level. A yearbook might be available in multiple places, but probably not so much. The same thing for like a photo collection or newspaper collections. They are a little bit more valuable because they're not indexed, they're not digitized, they're not so widely available. The other great thing about focusing on these local resources is that you usually have a local librarian who's able to help you and who has a lot of knowledge of the area and, of course, knowledge of the collections for the facility where they work. So we're going to dive in a little bit more into the local libraries and local repositories. So when we're talking about local libraries, we're not talking state level, we're talking either county or local level. So your county level might be the Monmouth County Library, like the main branch, or it's more local libraries like the Hazlitt branch or the Asbury Park branch. Local level might just also be a public library that's not affiliated with, that's not so much associated with a county system, like outside of New Jersey, or a library that is just, has a local history room, Plainfield Public Library, Asbury Park Public Library, things like that. So you're going to look for libraries that either have what's called a genealogy room or genealogy center, or sometimes it's called a local history room or a local history center. So they are typically going to have some helpful genealogical resources, but they may also have some local history resources as well as genealogy how-to type of books and things like that. So looking at local facilities, what are you going to find there? So local libraries and historical societies sometimes do have some overlap in content, but local libraries, you're typically going to find things like old city directories. You may find newspapers, either actual microfilm of newspapers or indexes, or even sometimes I've seen hard copies in big bound books of newspapers, but sometimes you may also find vertical files that have newspapers by topic. For example, if you want to see all the clippings that the library took out of papers for years and years about the local high school band or the local police department, something like that. Published genealogies, they often have those for the families that were from the area. And then photo collections, they can be donated photo collections, they can be the town's photo collections. It really just depends. There's no rhyme or reason to exactly what a library has aside from what they've collected and what perhaps has been donated to them. Sometimes you'll also find things like local maps, annual reports for parts of the town or organizations involved, historical maps, and sometimes aerial photos. Some libraries also have cemetery records or copies of them for maybe a cemetery that was run by the town. And then things like brochures and booklets from events, maybe anniversary events or church events or things like that that have taken place. Historical societies, what we're talking about here are, for example, we're going to talk today about the New Jersey Historical Society. Again, if you're in another state, there's probably a state level historical society as well. And then county level society. So sometimes this is called a historical society, historical association. Sometimes it's called a historical commission. You can probably find one for most counties. There's really most counties in New Jersey have them, and most counties in most states have some kind of society. And then also there are local historical societies just for a town. Some towns have their own historical society. Some towns' historical societies may be a one-person operation, so be patient when you are messaging them. They probably are volunteers and overworked. So make sure that you check into that as well. And it may not be a standalone building with a research facility. It may be a small organization and there's a little room in the back of town hall that they keep their belongings in. So the historical societies, again, like I said, they will have a lot of the same resources as libraries and the local history room. So they may have those newspaper city directories, but they also might be more likely to have some more manuscript materials that are more delicate, like family Bibles or someone's personal papers, larger collections that maybe a local library couldn't or wouldn't take, like corporate records. They also could possibly have and probably do have funeral home and cemetery records more so than a local library would. And then they may also have published papers or other academic resources and, just generally miscellaneous manuscript materials and that don't fall into these categories over here. So we're going to go over the kinds of collections that they might have in more detail and how to use them. So newspapers is a big one. That's probably the thing that you see most often in local libraries and local historical societies is they usually have their local newspapers. And if it's a county society, they may have them for neighboring towns. If it's the town, they may just have their own and it may be one collection. So sometimes these are on microfilm. It may sound funny to say, but I've visited many historical societies where they had newspapers on microfilm, but they did not actually have a microfilm reader. So you can ask them if that's the case to see if there's possibly a library loan that could happen and allow you to ship that microfilm to another facility that has a reader, and then they ship it back to them when they're done. So I've done that in a couple of instances. Many of these libraries are underfunded and they don't have the resources to fix an old broken microfilm machine, or they just don't have one anymore. So often you will find these on microfilm, but like I said, there also are vertical files. If you're not familiar with those, these are files that are typically arranged sort of by topic. And to give you an example, the local library, maybe for many years, from the 1930s to the 1980s, they read the newspaper. It was someone's job to read the newspaper and clip out anything relevant. So if they had a folder on, like I mentioned, the police department or the fire department, or library activities or the local high school. They would clip any articles that pertain to those topics, stamp them with a date, and put them into a file. And those files get very, very big over the years, and they can be really useful if you have a particular subject like that you're interested in. And I'll show you some examples of that later that I have for my own family. So name indexes also are sometimes really helpful at local libraries and historical societies. So there may be a local newspaper that hasn't yet been digitized that you can't easily go on Genealogy Bank or newspapers.com and search for your ancestors' names. But again, over the years, as the newspaper came out, it was someone's job at the library to index maybe the obituaries or big news articles or something like that. And those indexes still exist. So for those papers that are not digitized, if there's a name index for the paper, that's a great way to find information about your family where normally you wouldn't be able to find it unless you had a date to target. When you are working with newspapers, it's very common for there to be missing parts. You can probably fill in the blanks, possibly at another library, maybe at the Library of Congress. If there are missing pieces, you may be able to find them elsewhere. But the historical societies and local libraries both have newspapers, so if you're not finding it in one place, definitely check another. This is a photograph that was in the newspaper of my dad, and this was something that I knew about, but I wasn't sure exactly of the date, but I knew the range. I knew it was somewhere around Mother's Day, and we thought that he was either 2 or 3 years old. So it turned out he was 2. And so in this instance, this was a photo, and my grandparents had kept a different photo that was in a different paper, but always knew that there was another photo because this incident made multiple papers at the time. My dad was 2 years old. He fell out of a second story window. He hit an awning below and then hit the ground. And he was very lucky that he survived that, but it made the news and he was in the paper, two different pictures, this being one of them. So my grandparents had the other picture and the little clipping below of the caption, but not the news article and not this picture or the associated news article. So this was something I was able to find at a local library. And I was fortunate to know that this existed, so I knew a frame of reference for the date, but even if I didn't, I would have been able to find it. Um, so looking at personal papers, these can be really, really large collections if it was someone who maybe was a doctor or a researcher, or they can be small, like a simple diary. And sometimes they're not finished. Sometimes the person died in the middle of their research, or sometimes it's, years and years and years, and it just is missing years and years and years as well, that the person also worked. So depending on what the personal papers are for, they could be occupational related, like a physician or someone who owned a business. They also can be great for researching, for fact checking published genealogies. If the published genealogy is written by someone who has personal papers at a library somewhere, I would definitely look for those. As genealogists, we always get really frustrated with those published genealogies because they often are not source cited. But if you have access to the researcher's personal papers, you can somewhat work with that a little bit more so than if you're working just with a plain old uncited, unsourced published genealogy. So these personal papers, they may have gone very far away from where you think they should be. So there are personal papers for researchers of New Jersey families that are in libraries all around the country because the papers passed down a couple generations and then they got donated after the family moved away. So definitely look wide and far for these if you're targeting a specific person's personal papers. If you're more interested in the local area, you might want to start with the local repository and see what they have that might pertain to your family if it's not specific to your family. So this is an example. This is an excerpt from the Dodd family genealogy, which is an Essex County family. And my question that I had here was I wanted to know Sarah's married name and how the author knew she was still living in 1861. So obviously this is not explored in the book, but I had a suspicion that this Sarah was the Sarah who married my ancestor. And I was able to figure that out by finding the personal papers, and I'll show you a little more about that a little bit later. This is another example of personal papers that are found far away from where the person lived and where they did the majority of their work. So Henry Goddard, which the name may sound familiar for if you've heard of a Goddard school, he was a researcher. He did a lot of research on children with disabilities, and a lot of his research was focused at a school down in Vineland, New Jersey, where a family member of mine lived for many years, both as a child and later as an adult. And I was really interested in some of his research, and I was able to find it at a library in Ohio. So it was not where the research was primarily held, which was down in Vineland. It wasn't even, other places where he lived. It was in a very random place. So we want to definitely, take a look at that. And these are things that were helpful to me as I was researching, not so much related to my ancestor, but related to context that I was interested in as I was taking on this research project. Um, Photos are also huge for local libraries and local historical societies. And again, they could be photos that were curated by the library or by the town or by a certain, department or organization in the town, or they could be just scrapbooks that were donated years and years ago from a family. So definitely look into the photo collections that they have. Many of them will have a little bit of a description of where they came from, and you can sort of tell if they may or may not be relevant to you. Others, you may find yourself just flipping pages and looking at the names associated with the photos. You never know when you'll find something. I never thought that I would find photographs of my family members in a library in Illinois. It just was not on my radar, but that's where they wound up, and I was able to find 5 or 6 of them from this particular family in that collection. And I don't know how they got there. They're there. And I was able to find reference to them in a catalog, but there is no reference, even digging further with librarians, no reference to how they actually got out there. But definitely take a look at photos. And photos don't always have to be of people. Photos can be of events that people are at, and the focus is on the event. Photos can also be of homes. And we'll talk a little bit more about a little bit of house research later. And there are some local library resources, particularly in New Jersey, that can be helpful for that. Family records. So these can be family Bibles, any kind of like general family memorabilia, someone's, family reunions, family events, things like that, diaries and just remembrances of those things. And then sometimes there's a family collection that includes, old records, certificates, deeds that were being held by the family, church records, along with family Bibles, which were the main way of recording family events. But as time went on, people did start to keep other documentation as well. So this is an example from the Keene Family Bible. This was something found at the Ocean County Historical Society. And it's, just an example of a family Bible, and those can be found in many places, but this was just one of them. And then academic resources as well, if you're interested more in the history of the area, as far as how your ancestors interacted with it, someone else's research may be helpful to you. Again, it's not going to be about your family, but it may be useful in figuring out, an immigrant community and what that was like during that time, if your family was part of that immigrant community, or generally, if they lived in a certain area for a long time, the history of that community over time might be helpful to you. Family histories, we talked about these a little bit, but of course the published family histories that are, usually around early 1900s, a lot of those were created. But also, local libraries and historical societies may have more recent family histories, and they may be a little bit more well documented or not. Diaries and journals also, count towards family history as well. And then, looking at what has been published. Some of these may be online, some of them may be just something that's sitting in a historical society that's not even on the radar to be online. Property history. So we'll look at a local library that has some really great architectural material for properties, but many libraries do have something, and if it's not given to them, it may still be with the town. But they can be zoning records, building records, photos, drawings, things like that. This was actually kind of a combination of both. It was a little pamphlet that talked about some of the historic homes in Springfield, Illinois. And this was a little bit about a house that was there, not when the people that I am related to were living in it, but a little bit later than that, kind of memorializing the original owners of the house and things like that. But historical societies have, a lot of information on properties as well as people. So this was an interesting find. It talked about a lot of key features of the house, and you can still see them present today. Libraries, remember, they are going to be somewhat the official repository for many town records. If the town can't keep them, the library is typically given custody of those. So looking at town records, they can be, annual reports for the town, which will have details about every part of the town, the library, the police department, the sanitation department, all of their, sort of annual reports. Same thing goes with, township committees, tax records. They may have old tax records and tax maps as well. So when you're looking for these resources, don't limit yourself to things that are compiled like annual reports or yearbooks or things like that. You may be looking at actual manuscript materials, and you'll typically find those more at historical societies and not so much local history rooms, but you never know. Anything can be anywhere. But when you're looking at look in the catalog, see what they have. and make sure that you're searching the catalog well. So you want to make sure that you're looking at published sources as well as manuscript materials. Don't limit yourself, and we'll talk more about using those catalogs in a little bit. City directories are also really popular in both historical societies and libraries. If you are not finding them online, you probably can find them locally. Not every library is probably going to have a full run. You may have, some years are at one place, some are at another. And this doesn't have to be as historic as you think. They have telephone books, in my local library from when I was a kid, like in the 1990s. So keep that in mind if you're researching someone who lived not that long ago, maybe someone who's still alive, and you're trying to trace their steps, that may be an option for you as well. Cemetery and funeral home records are really hit or miss. Sometimes they are still with the cemetery, still with the funeral home. Sometimes they are non-existent and they've been disposed of. But in many cases, if a funeral home or a cemetery is no longer operational on a daily basis, they have been given to someone. So that could be your local historical society or a library. Sometimes you'll see uh, records for cemeteries that were sort of operated by the town, either at its end or at an earlier date. Sometimes the town was involved in the operation of the cemetery, and the records will wind up in the local library. I've seen that happen a couple of times with New Jersey libraries. But then also sometimes it's just defunct and there's nowhere else to put the records, so that's where they wind up, which is obviously a much better place than having them wind up in the trash. Sometimes in these places, you will also find just strange artifacts. You might find someone's trophies. You might find a collection of military medals. You might find local stores, little things that they gave away years ago, 50 years ago. I've seen little matchbooks and things like that in local libraries with advertisements on them. So if if it's an artifact and it pertains to the town or the county, you may be able to find it there as well. Okay, so we are going to look at some ways to find materials. So it's not always obvious. Like I said, if you want to look at the town your mom grew up in or your dad grew up in and just go to the library and see what's there, that's fine. But you might want to do some research first. And you might find that material you're really interested in, like church records or yearbooks or something like that, maybe they're actually not there. Maybe they're in a strange place that you wouldn't have thought to look. So we're going to start by looking at some catalogs for the actual facilities. Most libraries and historical societies do have some kind of either a catalog or just a web page that has some information on what they have. And it might just simply say, we have yearbooks from 1919 to 1972 for the high school. And we have this newspaper that covers these years. So some websites might be just that simple, a basic listing of what they have. Some may have an actual catalog where you can search and see, exactly what they have, and you can see call numbers associated and things like that. And then some have an actual database with digital images in it. So it really depends on the library. And on the flip side, we'll talk about this when we talk about Irvington Public Library in a minute. Some libraries have nothing on their website. They have nothing indicating that they have any kind of local history, library, or room, or information, or anything. And they may have a fantastic facility, but nobody knows it's there because there's not even a reference to it. And then we're also going to talk about some other catalogs that search more globally. So getting into those, Nuckmuck is something that was started in 1959 by Library of Congress, and it was started out as basically a master catalog of collections. So obviously back then there were no computers, so this was something that was on the shelves available in libraries. It was a large catalog printed in multiple volumes. And there are probably two libraries I know of that still have them in print, but it's essentially now a database. And there is some overlap between Nuckmuck and WorldCat, so you still need to search both of them, depending on what you're looking for. But we're going to talk about how to use both of them in a minute. So WorldCat began as something called OCLC in the 70s, and it includes manuscripts, but it also includes just general collections like books and journal, periodical type of material. And then Archive Grid is part of that that is limited to archival or manuscript material, so not published material. So you're talking your church records or an old, you know, journal or diary or something like that. And generally, that material has probably not been digitized or published in most cases. So looking at WorldCat, I'm going to search for Olin Garrison. So Olin Garrison was also another educator, similar time frame to Goddard. And I'm interested in him to see if he has any personal papers or has anything that he's written about, his time working at the Vineland facility that I have a relative at. So WorldCat is a good place to look. So WorldCat, you're going to come up with published materials that the person, has published or is referenced in or something like that. But you may also, if you look on the left side, you can drill down to just looking at archival material. And if you want, just looking at archival material that's downloadable, that maybe has been digitized. So you can, filter here. Remember, WorldCat is, a little bit of everything. So if you want to search for just sort of manuscript materials and weed out like those publications and somebody's thesis and things like that, you might go to Archive Grid. So if you search for Olin Garrison there, you might find some personal papers that he had some, involvement in. You may also find that, the second listing, um, doesn't really have much of anything to do with him. It's just got some similar keywords. And then I'm going to do the same thing for William Ogden Wheeler. So he was um, the author of published genealogy that I was interested in. So I might want to search for him and see if there are any personal papers that mention him or that have reference to anything that he's doing. And then I'm going to give you an example here about searching for records related to an entity, so not related to a person. So this is Park Presbyterian Church. I am interested in, a family that I knew went there, and there was reference of a pew being passed down, and membership in the church and their association with this specific pew, and that was given to a certain son in a will. So I'm trying to find out more about what exactly that was, how long they had it, was it passed down prior to that? So I want to look at Park Presbyterian Church records, and that's a church in Newark. So, it's not surprising to see that, there's something, a treasurer's account book at Rutgers. That makes sense. And then Newark Public Library has a postcard collection that has probably some picture of the church in it. But this Winterthur Museum, maybe you've never, excuse me, never heard of that, but that's in Delaware. So you wouldn't have probably looked there for records related to Park Presbyterian Church. But with these global catalogs, you can find things in places that you were not expecting. And while we're on catalogs, I do want to talk about local archiving projects. So there are some of these popping up in random places. There's not a few, there's not a whole lot, there's only a few. But these are essentially projects where they are focused on a local area. So it's not a local archive in the sense that you cannot go to the Newark Archives Project. It's a project to gather information about any kind of manuscript materials that are related to Newark. So this is a project that gathers all the information, but the materials are located at a whole bunch of different places. So we can look at the website, and if you wanted to choose a subject that you were interested in, you could do that. You could also look at all the facilities where the materials they've found are located. So this is a lot of facilities. So some of them are pretty obvious. Barringer High School Archive, that's a big high school in Newark, one of the oldest in the country. And it obviously they have an archive of their yearbooks and things like that. So that's an obvious one. But looking down this list, you have the British Library, Brooklyn Historical Society, Catholic University of America archives. these are not places you probably would have looked for material on Newark, New Jersey, but something is there. So you can drill down a bunch of different ways. You can also search. So if I'm interested in the Newark Police Department, I can search for that. I can also check off police, but there's different ways of searching may yield different results. So if I'm interested in the Newark Police Department, I can see, the first collection is related to the civil rights movement. So there's probably reference to the police department in there. The second collection is photographs. The next is desk blotters. So, depending on what I'm interested in, am I interested in some kind of police records? Am I interested in photos? Am I interested in finding a personnel record for someone who was in the police department? Now, all of these are options depending on, sort of what it is that you find. And these are, again, all at different places. So, the city clerk's number two is right there in Newark. Number four is close by in Seton Hall, but others may not be. And then also looking at these global catalogs is important, but sometimes the local library, like I mentioned, has their own database. Some libraries have them, and sometimes it may just be a newspaper database, and they outsource to a third party to do that. And there's a search feature on their website that will allow you to search digitized newspapers. But some libraries, they don't have anything at all. Like I mentioned, they have a great collection, but no online presence, so you would never know that it existed. In those cases, I would definitely call, but we'll definitely take a look at some of the databases. This is one example from Plainfield Public Library, and they probably have, I would say, in New Jersey, one of the best digitized collections. Um, Out there, and they also have an excellent, in-person collection as well, but much of it has been digitized. So if you're looking for yearbooks or newspapers or things like that, you may be able to find them online. They also have, I mentioned, architectural drawings. They have blueprints to a lot of the old historic houses in Plainfield, and they go back to, fairly early on up to, more recent improvements in 2002. So these are available online, but they also have excellent, just photograph collections, a map collection, all the local clubs and organizations that had sort of scrapbooks monumenting or memorializing their activities. Those are in there as well. And then on the flip side, I'm going to mention again Irvington Public Library, which is an example of, a library that has probably the best local history collection I've seen at a library in New Jersey, but you would never know it exists. There's not even mention to it on their website. If you call there, you have to kind of, break down a couple barriers in order to get to someone who will let you make an appointment to go into the room. I know they've had some like damages and um, theft of materials and things like that over the years. So I think that that is probably part of why they don't, um, really emphasize that it exists and that it's open to the public. Um, but this was a photo and a news article I found related to the police department that had my dad in it. And then, another one, and these again are not that old. This is from 1989, but they have articles, going, clippings in their vertical files going back to like the early 1900s. And then, just annual reports too. So these were part of the police department's annual reports and, things that my dad was in charge of while he was there. So we are going to take a look quickly at the New Jersey Historical Society's page. So let me just switch over here so I can do that. All right. So if you go to the Historical Society's website, you can check out their catalog. And what they have here, you'll see an education section, and they do have some programs, some of them more, history related, but sometimes they do genealogy programming as well. They have a museum, and you can look at their collections, and I wouldn't skip out on that. It's probably not the main thing you want to look at, but I have found collections donated by my family to the Historical Society or things related to my family and where they lived donated there. But the library is kind of where you want to be. So they have their policies and procedures listed on here. So if you want to make an appointment, all the information that you need is on there. And then their policies. So one policy here that you might want to be aware of is they don't really allow any kind of like major photocopying. So they don't want, a lot of their materials, reproduced without permission. You have to get permission. And if so, if you get permission, they, typically don't want you copying things on machines. They'll let you use a camera if you have permission. So you have to very specifically ask for that. Um, but the archives is, sort of all of the materials that you might want to search and see, what do they have, might be of interest to you. And then the print collections as well. So we're going to go to the library archives first, and these are their manuscript materials. So these are going to be church records and organizational materials, family papers, things like that that we just talked about. And you can search by browsing, or you can search by actually searching up here. So I tend, if you're not familiar with the site and you don't kind of already know a little bit of what you're looking for, I like to use the browse feature because there's a couple different ways you can use it. So you can use it just alphabetically. You can go by topic. So if you know you're looking for city directories, or you're looking for a church record, you can go right into that section. But again, I wouldn't limit yourself to that because they may have things that you're interested in that you just don't know about. But here it's all of the topics: military records, Jewish history, leisure organizations, um, photographs, things like that, their vertical files. So we'll just go into church records, for example, and you can search either by denomination or by location. So we're going to go into location first. And so if you are interested, in a certain town, we're just going to go to Mendham. So they have two churches for Mendham, First and Second Presbyterian. And if you want to go in, this is the manuscript number, 126 or 127. So we're going to click on excuse me, 126, and then it'll give you a little description of exactly what that is. So in some cases, you may click on a collection and it might just be 100th anniversary pamphlet is all they have. And it's not going to be, the actual baptisms or the marriages that you were hoping for. If that's the case, use those more broad catalogs to search for that, because they most likely are somewhere. They're just not here. So remember, this is just specific to the Historical Society. So we're going to go back and we'll click on First Presbyterian Church and see what they have. And again, that's a very small collection. It's a copy of one session book, and then a volume of data that's compiled based on some information from other records. So I'm going to go now to a collection that I know is a little bit more involved. So First Presbyterian Church in Newark, and that's actually a couple of collections. So we're going to go to 125 first. Oops, that's not working. Oh, and that's not working either. Let's try. Okay. Well, we got one out of the three to work. So this is a collection that is related to a specific family. The family, I think he was a judge. Yes, he was a judge. And there is obviously some reference in here to the church. So you'd have to look into the collection a little bit more in detail to figure that out. So we're going to go back again, but you can see how this works. And again, you can search by denomination too if you're not super familiar with the areas in New Jersey. Sometimes it's good to do that because your family may have lived in one town, but the church they were in was in another. And if you don't know the geography well, just seeing the churches might be helpful. Something might jump out at you. So if you want to look for, Episcopal churches, and then you're kind of scanning for place names that might be of interest to you, you can do that as well. All right. Um, so another thing, if you wanted to take a look at, they have obviously estate papers, genealogy collections is probably a little bit different than what you would think. It's not how to, it's, here are our family papers, family collections. So if you have a family that you're interested in or that's adjacent to your family, this is something you may want to look at. Um, but we're going to go down to photographs as well. So in here, you can sort by place. So if you want to, we can go to N, we'll go to Newark and see. Well, let's go to, back up. Um, so let's try a easier one. All right. So you can see kind of the kinds of descriptions that they have here. So Roseland scenes, if your family is from Roseland or Roselle or Rosemont, you may be interested in this. And then you'll see in here, sometimes there are people's names. This is a picture of someone's dining room. And so this type of thing, you're not going to drill down to that, typically by um, if you don't know it's there, you're not going to be able to find that. And that's where the search function can be helpful. So we're going to go back up, um, and we'll just go back into here. Just to show one more time, the vertical files, scrapbooks. Actually, let's go in scrapbooks real quick. And you can see like scrapbook collections. So this is, these are newspaper clippings related to certain topics. So if you want to, take a look at this, look at the years that it covers. So if you're interested in Princeton College, there may be newspaper clippings related to that. Other topics, churches, things like that. These are again not going to be church records, but they're newspaper clippings related to that church or related to that sporting event. All right. So that's how you can browse. You can, again, browse by name of collection. This is probably the least helpful, but if you know a name, it's easy to drill down from it. But so if you wanted to, search in here for something that was of interest to you, so I'm just going to type in Irvington. My family is long from Irvington, so we'll see what they have there that might be of interest to you. So one of the funeral homes in Irvington, their collections are there from 1901 to 1946. So I bet if I looked back, I could find someone in my family who was buried out of that funeral home. So I might be interested in taking a look at that. Also, if you type in a place, it will bring up, material from all kinds of different collections. So maybe you looked in newspapers and you looked under Irvington, but you weren't finding what you were looking for. If you were looking by the name of the paper. So looking this way, you can see what papers they actually have. So Irvington Record, Irvington Herald, or not Herald, Irvington Times, and you can see the years that they have them for. And when you see 1 year, don't be disappointed if it's just 1 day or 1 week. So generally if they have a run like this, it typically is at least, a good amount of material. But if you see 1 year, that could just be, a very small collection. Um, so things like photographs, if there are photographs of families, of an event, water damage after a storm, telephone poles, houses after a storm in Irvington, these are all things that are going to come up in the catalog. And just real quickly, I'll go to library print collections. So, if you are interested in maps and things like that, those are available as well. If you contact the Historical Society, you can make an appointment and they can help you to figure out what it is that you need, and how it may how they can help you do your research. All right, so we're gonna quickly go um, back in. Oh, hopefully you can see that. Yeah,
Yeah, looks good.
oh, okay, thank you. Um, so using them from afar, if you find a historical society out somewhere else where, you don't live there, they typically have limited resources, but they will charge a fee. You may be able to do that through the library. If not, you could probably find a local researcher. Um, Historical societies typically probably will charge you for inquiries. Libraries may or may not, but it does depend on volume for both. But almost all of them will do some kind of research or reference lookup. It may take a while. It may cost you some money, but typically most of them are willing to do something for patrons or for the public. So working with these facilities, just make sure that you're checking hours and checking into that before you go and visit. Some of them may be closed for a private event. They may have, not regular 9 to 5 business hours. And then also pay attention to how they are organizing their records or how they are arranged. If they need to be pulled from off-site, that may be indicated on the website. And then expect those kind of broken runs of certain records. If it says that if a website says they have this newspaper or they have this yearbook, I would call and make sure they have the year you're looking for before you go there if you're going for a very specific thing, because it doesn't always mean that they have every instance of everything. If you're interested, you can find out what the fees are for research, and then also make sure that you're using those finding aids and catalogs. They will be your friend as you're, continuing on with this research, especially helping you prepare and make the most of your time at a facility that may be farther away or that you might not get to or have a lot of, they might not have a lot of opening hours. So I'm happy to answer questions if anybody has any.
All right, thank you so much, Melissa. If anybody does have questions, please feel free to send them to us using the Q&A or the chat. Let's see here. So there's one, it's, I don't know how much experience you have with this, but it is talking about their family in Europe, how they've traced everything back to like the 1600s and they have to go back to Europe now. Do you have any um, suggestions for dealing maybe with local repositories internationally?
Yeah, so internationally, same setup as here. Like if you're researching in England or Germany, there's still a library system. It's set up, a little bit differently. For example, like in New York City, we have New York Public Library, and some of the local facilities have local rooms. In London, same thing. Each, little branch of the library system there has information about that particular part of the city. So that's the same in other places. I live right next to Middletown, so I do know of the Stouts and Richard and Penelope, but I don't have any more information on them going back. But I would definitely, take a look at some research guides for the countries that you're interested in if you're interested in international research. And I see someone noted Presbyterian Historical Society in Philadelphia. Yeah, they're a great resource. A lot of their kind of more genealogical records, the baptisms, the marriages, and the burials, they are now on Ancestry, but it's not everything. So a lot of them have other church records. They have financial records. They have membership, things like that that are not necessarily online. So they are definitely still a great resource, but they did put a lot of their material online with Ancestry quite a few years, just a few years ago. Any other questions?
Do you have recommendations for finding a person local to the archive to hire to do some research?
Yeah, you can look. Sometimes the archive or the facility might have their own researchers list, but you can also look on, the Association of Professional Genealogists list is a good place to start. There are other researcher lists out there. There might be like a local chapter or a local group. You can check the BCG or the ICAPGen. researchers lists too to see if you can find someone local. Any other questions?
I don't see anything, so I think we can go ahead and end it there. Thank you so much, Melissa. We really, really appreciate it.
Sure, thank
You're
you.
a wealth of information, so it's great to have you speak for us.
Thank you. Have a nice day, everybody.
All right, everybody be safe, be well, and hopefully we'll see you soon.